All right, so I'm going to talk about the next side or the other side of this coin, which is to say that once we win debt abolition, and we will win debt abolition, we have a moral obligation to make sure that a student debt crisis never happens again. So, how do we make sure that a student debt crisis never happens again? Well, we also win free college for all. And I just want to say from the very beginning that free college for all changes everything. It changes what you might study. It changes that educational experience that Marcus was talking about. It changes your dreams. It changes your possibilities. It opens up all sorts of doors because you get to study to become a fuller human being. You get to study to be better in community. You get to study not just for the job, but you get to study because you like to learn. And so free college for all is a big game changer. And in the richest country in the world, not only should public higher education be free and universally available to anyone that seeks it, but we should also get rid of the racist entrance exams that keep people from it. We should provide people stipends so that they can live and study without having to work their asses off 30, 40 hours a week while taking a full load of classes. I mean, come on, seriously? If we really cared about this world, if we really cared about each other, we would care enough to give people the chance to study what they want to study and not have to work the whole time. So we need to begin to open up the horizon that another university experience is possible. And thankfully, in the last several years, that has started to happen. And I want to use as a starting point, although it's not an end point because there's always room for improvement, some of the ideas put forward by Bernie Sanders and Representative Jayapal when they put forth what's called the College for All plan. Just some of the highlights of the College for All plan that were introduced, especially during this last presidential election cycle, are simply that Sanders said you could make public four-year college, community colleges, trade schools, and tribal schools free for anyone to study it. You could quadruple, you could enormously increase the investment in HBCUs. You could improve tenure line possibilities. You can improve the salaries of staff working at universities. You could improve lecturer and adjunct possibilities. If we wanted to. And if we wanted to is what I'm going to talk about. How do we get to this point? Because the gotcha question is, how do you pay for this? Well, fuck that, because there's easy ways to pay for that. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to show that soon enough. All right. So we need to remember, as Jalil pointed out, that universities, public universities in this country used to be free. Up until the 1970s, you could go to CUNY in New York, one of the best schools in the country, and not pay a dime. Maybe you pay a slight entrance fee. In California, this was also the case. But, and this is really important, and I think Jalil also nailed this, when they were free, they were mainly for white males. And so you see, and this is a Reagan policy, but also other neoliberals, that as the student population and and I want to say, this is brought on by student movements. Student movements are fighting for more access. Student movements are fighting for more inclusion, and they're winning. And that's when Reagan and this other group called the Trilateral Commission, they come along and say, there's too much democracy on campus. These students have too much freedom. Let's tamp that down. And so what do? They jack tuition, and they make everyone go into debt to study, because we know that it's a hell of a lot harder to participate in political movements when you're working all the time and when you got major debt that you got to pay off. Because you get busted, you're going to have a hell of a hard time paying those loans off. They knew this. This is what they do. And we get to this college crisis where we are now. So state funding gets drastically cut across the country. In Pennsylvania, where I am, it's cut by 34% over the last 10 years. Tuition keeps going up. That's how you produce student loan. But not only that, and this is really important to remember, and we don't have time to get into it, but the entire university system in this country is built on colonial land that was stolen from indigenous populations, that our most quote unquote treasured institutions, the Ivy Leagues, are built with slave money and slave labor. And so not only in the Debt Collective do we call for free public higher education, but we call for a free reparative public higher education. In other words, when we make college free for everyone, we need to make college a reparative process, a reparative experience, and it needs to be part of a larger series of reparations that are owed to those populations that have been historically marginalized and oppressed and brutalized in this country. And so this is only one step in accounting for some of that. So again, it's not just free college for all, it's free, as my colleagues Hannah Appel and Andrew Ross say, it's free reparative higher education. Materially, but also we change curriculums, we change courses, we offer college as a place to do right by past social wrongs. Colleges are a place to repair through reparation various sorts of harms done to communities and individuals in this country up until the present day, and no one should have to pay a dime in order to have access to that. And definitely no one should go into debt. So what are some of the cases? How do we address this question that always comes up? And it's the gotcha question. Someone's always going to say, yeah, but how do you pay for it? And the first thing I want to say, and if you get anything out of this entire 10 minutes that I'm going to talk, please remember this. Budgets, whether it be the national budget, whether it be your state budget, whether it be your city budget, budgets are moral documents. In other words, the ways that our country, our state, our city spends money is a moral reflection of not only the people in power, but the people that put them in power. And so when we think of that, when we think of our budget as a moral document, I got to say, this country is morally bankrupt. I get worked up about this shit. All right. So this country is morally bankrupt when we start to think about it. And I want to show you how. So the first thing when someone says, how are you going to pay for that free college tuition dream you have? I would say, don't go straight to the numbers, but I would say, ask them a couple questions. And the first thing I would say is, let's talk about some other things. Like, let's talk about war. You want to talk about my dream about free college education? Let's talk about war, just for a moment. And I want to say, this is a critique of war. This is a critique of imperialism. It's not a critique of any people that have done service or veterans. So respect to those folks. This is a critique of an imperialist, neo-colonialist country that is addicted to war. How so? Much of our national debt is due to spending not on social programs like education, but it's due to war. So I want to show you a couple things. All right, so the first thing that I want to show you, this is federal discretionary spending 2019. Now, in the blue, you have military spending. It accounts for 53% of the budget. 53%, $730 billion. You know how much education counts for? Education is this little orange piece right here, 5%. All right, so we're 53% of our discretionary budget. That's like after you pay for all the bills, is military. 5% is for education. That's just one way to think about this. Another way to think about this, let me pull up one more thing here, is to look at the history of how we got into our massive national debt that all the Republicans and Democrats like to talk about in the first place. All right, so this is a quick chart. This shows something very important, that our public debt of the percentage of GDP grows every time there's a war. So Civil War, World War I, World War II, our debt goes way up. These are Vietnam and Korean wars. We've been at war since a lot of you were born, Afghanistan and Iraq. In fact, you've never known a country without a war. And today we're here, where we're still at war. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. This is to say that our debt increases not because we're spending lavishly on things like education or housing or other Medicare for all type programs. It's because we keep fighting fucking wars. That's one of the reasons. And for now, and this is really important, for the last 20 years, during the so-called war on terror, direct military costs for war have reached $2 trillion. Okay, that's $2 trillion. That's over 20 years. Added to that is a $900 billion interest fee. So we're talking $3 trillion in war expenses over the last 20 years. Even if we stopped fighting the wars, which we're not going to, even if we stopped fighting the wars, interest payments on that $2 trillion would rise to over $2 trillion by 2030 and to $6.5 trillion by 2050. This is all in a Brown report, a Brown University report. So we're going to be paying for interest on these war debts well into the future. Again, all that money that goes to every missile, that goes to every fighter jet, that goes to every bullet is money that should be going to books, to school buildings, to pay for people to go to school. It's that simple. There's no way you can tell me that this country doesn't have the money to pay for everyone to get a degree or a master's degree when we spend $3 trillion on war alone. And that's just going to keep growing. You cut war, you have money for what you need. There's other ways to do this. We could talk about taxes. And we could talk about, I don't know if you knew this, but during the Great Depression, Congress raised taxes to 94% on the wealthiest income earners. Think about that for a second. To get out of a recession, they raised taxes on the wealthiest to 94%. From the 1950s to the 1970s, taxes on the highest earners never fell below 70%. You know what they are today? They're below 40%. In other words, the Jeff Bezoses of the world, when they do pay any taxes, or the Bill Gates of the world, are paying lower taxes now than at almost any point in American history. Not to mention, how many of you, just a show of hands, how many of you bought a pair of Nike shoes last year? Anyone? Okay, if you didn't buy a pair of Nike shoes, how many of you sent anything via FedEx last year? All right, guess what? If you bought a pair of Nike shoes or you mailed anything by FedEx, you paid more for those shoes and more for that package than Nike or FedEx paid in taxes last year. That's totally fucked up. Nike, FedEx, and 55 other countries, around 55 other major corporations didn't pay anything in taxes. And you're going to come and tell me there's no money for a college education? Are you serious? Like, really? After that? If I buy a pair of Nike shoes, I'm paying more than Nike paid. That's insane. So what do we do? So one of the ways that you can raise the money that we need to pay for college for all is to actually start making some of these folks who created this debt crisis, who benefit from this debt crisis, make them pay up. Stop the war. And here I just want to say, again, it's a plan that's on the table that needs improvement, but it's on the table that the Sanders plan had a simple solution to this. You could tax Wall Street gambling and raise $2.2 trillion to cancel all student debt and to fund free public higher education for everyone in this country. The Wall Street speculation tax, they called it, would have raised $2.4 trillion over 10 years by placing a 0.5% on stock trades. That's it. 50 cents on every $100 of stock. And a 0.1% on bond trades. In other words, even if you don't understand economics or math, which I don't, this is super easy. Like, that is not a lot. And if Wall Street can be bailed out again and again and again, why the hell can't we bail out 45 million student debtors? Are you serious? We're going to keep bailing out all these banks, bailing out all these corporations who aren't even paying taxes? And we can't bail out the Miriams of the world or the Karens of the world or Tiffany's of the world? All right, come on. That's insane. That's immoral. The final thoughts on this. One can make a good moral argument that to live a good life or a decent life, and not just live a life where you're struggling to get by, where you're just surviving, which so many people are forced to do, you need to have some sort of education. So we want to have and give people a chance to live a decent life of dignity, of hope, we got to give them a chance to study. Rather than just struggle in bare existence or bare life. And another argument could be that to fully develop ourselves as human beings, to develop our capabilities, our potentials, our dreams, we need to have opportunities to study what we want to study and study with others. Beyond the individual level, there is a really good case to be made that says democracy doesn't work if you deny education to so many people. And we deny education to so many people when we don't give them a chance to enter into study at a higher ed level. Democracy then becomes a very stratified society in which you have a very few amount of people leading a lot of blind folks. That doesn't work. It leads to disasters. It leads to people like Donald Trump and others. So if we want to have a good collective life and we want to have a decent, dignified individual life, we need to have the chance to study education at a higher level. We have the economic ability to do it. The question is, do we have the political will? And right now, the simple answer is we don't. And that's what the debt collector is here to do, to force it. As Frederick Douglass said, power cedes nothing without a demand. So we got to bring the power. And the only way to bring the power is to come together as a collective. Free college for all, full student debt cancellations on the horizon. The question is, are we going to walk there collectively to get to it?